I'm really pleased to welcome our today's speaker, who is Matilde Carrasco Barranco, who is she's the senior lecturer in aesthetics and theory of art at the University of Murcia in Spain. Her fields of interest are aesthetics and normative ethics, in particular the relationship between aesthetic value and other values of art, art criticism, and art and politics. She's the author of Consecuencias, Agencia y Moralidad from 2002. She edited a volume entitled Art, Emotion and Value, Proceedings of Fifth Mediterranean Congress of Aesthetics in 2012, and open access, a very nice book, The Orchard and the City Landscape Photograph in Murcia from the last year. Matilde is also the member of ARESMUR, which is a research center of aesthetics and theory of arts. We had the pleasure to host her as the invited speaker at our conference in 2019 in High Tatras, where she gave a talk, Make Me Feel and Think, the Role of Aesthetics in the End of Art, and was published in this nice proceedings. The title of today's lecture is Beauty, Anger, and Artistic Activism. Matilde, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, and sorry for the problems we had. Thanks, Adrian, and the Society of Aesthetics in Slovakia for that presentation, that giving me the opportunity to participate in this forum and share my work with all of you, and particularly with the Slovak friends that I had the chance to meet in Slovakia when I was over there a few years ago. I wish I'll be there again, but at least it's great to be here with you again. And well, thank you everyone for being here. I'll try to be brief. I think it's more or less 45 minutes. I think this is okay. You're not too tired. I have a presentation, as you see, that can make it easier for you to follow me. So, as announced by the title and explained in the abstract, my topic here is whether beauty is useful to artistic activism aimed at leading to political protest and action. This is something which has been deeply questioned for a long time by the politics of beauty, using the expression of Dave Beach, that has permeated the art of the 20th century, following the path of much of the avant-garde. But in particular, I'll be concerned with the argument given by Arthur Danto when explaining why artistic activism should avoid beauty. While beauty's tendency will be to heal, he claimed, political protest needs anger at its trigger. My aim is then, by examining the nature of both beauty and anger, to challenge such argument that necessarily opposes beautiful emotional effects on political action. The slide, please. I have been intrigued by this argument for some years now, ever since I started doing research on the abuse of beauty. The incompatibility of beauty with the arousal of anger plays an important part, I think, there. Because Danto believed that such conflict much explained beauty's absence from contemporary art and will prevent its return. What's more, I have already sketched a sort of answer in a chapter dedicated to beauty and politics, included in a companion to Arthur Danto, the volume to be published in May by Willie Blackwell. So let me take the opportunity to publicly thank the editors, Lydia Gare and Jonathan Guilford, for their efforts and good work, as well as the other contributors, some of them I see here today. And apologies for the publicity, but the thing is that in a happy coincidence, what I offer here is the result of further reflection on the matter, since my intrigue continued, especially when, slide please, in the abuse of beauty, Danto mentioned David Marat as a case of beauty whose aim was to arouse anger and indignation and to increase revolutionary fervor and hatred against the enemies of the revolution. He even concluded Caliphobia in Contemporary Art, an article published a year later, suggesting that David Marat might show that beauty in art need not be antithetical to political action, as so many anti-aesthetics, meaning more or less specifically anti-beauty, appear to think. However, to my knowledge, this hint was no further explained and actually came after insisting on the thesis previously sustained in The Abuse of Beauty, where Danto defended that beauty is at odds with political activism since it cannot provoke emotions which express offense, protest, and revolt, such as anger, and meant he believed that beauty will be for long exiled from mostly angrily political, he says, contemporary art. At this point, I have no other explanation but the one I gave in the companion. What was possible in the past would not be possible in the present, where beauty has been expelled from the definition of art, becoming only an option, among others, yet one declared inappropriate by a sociological discourse that politicizes and stigmatizes beauty, a stigma which, I concluded, Danto would not have fully overcome. Now I'm trying to dig more into the justification of such discourse that, as I'll be arguing shortly, not only continue to haunt somehow Danto, but may still persist in some relevant sectors of art and culture. Next slide. But first, let me start by briefly recalling that the politics of beauty in the 20th century, particularly in the visual arts, is pivotal to the more general question of beauty, a tongue away that affects contemporary culture in general and is due to diverse and complex reasons. Thus, there have been many ways of telling the story of whatever happened to beauty and why beauty and art, once thought of as belonging together, got divorced. The thing is that beauty suffered a progressive decline, at least since the 18th and 19th centuries, that accelerated with the artistic revolutions of the early 20th century. The slide. The roots of such decline are often explained by pointing out the metaphysical and epistemological crisis of modernity. In the aesthetic terrain, beauty became the paradigm of classical patterns and later academicism. Allied with modern sensibility, other categories, particularly the sublime, but also more glaring opposites to beauty, like the pathetic or the grotesque, spread, while beauty was losing its place as the central aesthetic value. Indeed, the eruption of the concept of the aesthetic somehow emptied the notion, making beauty synonymous with aesthetic excellence. The term was used to qualify high beauty in nature and art, as opposed to the lower beauties of the everyday, playful and decorative. But even as mark of aesthetic value, the use of beauty diminished. And as modern art advanced, theorists and critics stopped using the term beauty in favor of others, such as design, significant form, visualization, and so on. As a result, by the 50s, the term beauty had practically disappeared from the artistic and aesthetic discourse. Another. In 1948, the artist Bartlett Newman summarized the process in a well-known sentence: the impulse of modern art was to destroy beauty. Recently, Alexander Nihamas interprets this impulse as the emphasis on a theoretical and critical perspective toward the arts. As he argues, this theoretical spirit manifests itself on the very concept of the aesthetic and the disinterested attitude that it requires, coming to this eroticize art and changing the role that beauty had played before. Artistic beauty, as I was saying, is distinguished, appeals to good taste and reason, in contrast to a seductive beauty that moves us impulsively, inspiring desire of possession. This beauty was relegated to the field of popular or ordinary pleasures, of practical and personal interests, exemplified by human, mostly female body. Consequently, this impulse of modern art advanced until finally contemporary artistic production certified that beauty cannot define art. Moreover, art cannot be valued by its aesthetic appearance, since art was understood mostly as an intellectual activity. However, participating in this impulse towards theory and criticism, surely the rejection of beauty is most characteristic of the anti-aesthetic and anti-art tendencies the long progeny of the intractable avant-garde, as Danto called them, that continue the legacy of such avant-gardism of the early 20th century towards the politics of beauty. Another slide. Dave Beach summarizes the story as follows. Avant-gardism, both in the early 20th century avant-garde movements such as Dada and Surrealism, and the neo-avant-garde such as minimalism and conceptualism, recast beauty as ideologically complicit with political power, while simultaneously cultivating a sensitivity to the repressed value of ugliness, philistinism, shock, or abjection. On the face of it, then, the controversy about beauty appears to boil down to rival tastes, with traditionalists preferring order and beauty, while avant-gardists prefer disorder and shock. Danto agrees. Beauty was dethroned and despised as the result not so much of a conceptual as a political determination, due to its traditional moral weight, its connection with goodness, its promise of happiness. In a society that adored beauty and venerated artists who created, its suppression was a genuine and effective gesture of protest. The abuse of beauty became a device for dissociating the artists from the society they held in contempt, and contemporary art reproduces such caliphobia, taking on the role of the social criticism earlier represented by the avant-garde and assuming the moral and political responsibility of producing a similar impact on society. If the world is full of evil and injustice, it is not for us to hide it or mitigate it with compensatory beauty, especially when other aesthetic options are available. Another slide. Danto's point was then that beauty continues to be as politicized and stigmatized in contemporary art as ever was at the time of the intractable avant-garde, and predicted that the rejection of beauty will remain as long as the world stays as troubled as it is and artists care that we change it. As a caveat then, I'd like to outline that what he identifies by the current attitude in an official artistic culture is that is Dada through and through, he said, is activist art, namely the one directed to transform viewers into critics of society and calling them to action. Here is when beauty is seen as a moral and politically reactionary. In the words of art historian Alexander Albero, beauty knows no pain and helps to soften the troubles of the world instead of facing them. Thereby, beautifiers turn into collaborationists, in Danto's words. Another slide. Nevertheless, Danto pursued the issue of beauty at the time of its claimed return. The revival of beauty is demonstrated by the high number of publications and exhibitions that paid attention to the topic. Dave Hickey's 1993 manifesto even announced that beauty will be the defining problem of the next decade. And of course, if one looks to recent research in aesthetic, such as neuroaesthetics, environmental aesthetics, or the more recent interest in everyday life aesthetics, the significance of beauty is indisputable. Also, in art and culture, where Hickey's own prediction was focused, beauty is not hegemonic, but more present in artistic theory and practice that Danto foresaw. Successful artists show no shame in offering beauty. Another slide. Yet, while wrong in his predictions, Danto could have been right in appreciating the persistence of the stigma that results from the process of decline and politicization just briefly described, which somehow tarnishes this normalization of beauty. For example, sociologist Natalie Heinig concluded an interdisciplinary study on the values of art by saying that any observer of contemporary visual art knows that beauty has quite completely disappeared in the learned judgments on the works pertaining to contemporary art. As for another example, Robert Watts, in a study published in 2018, wondered why beauty had such scarce significance in artistic education. Particularly, he was surprised to realize that the references to beauty that appeared in the draft of the proposed national curriculum for a school in England by the Department of Education in 2013 were finally removed. Among the reasons was found out that art educators tend to associate experiences of beauty with passive appreciation rather than active engagement, and characterize notions of beauty, aesthetics, appreciation as outdated concepts compared with principles of participation, engagement, inspiration, and challenge. According to Watts as well, this polarization has much to do with the politics of beauty. The debate seems to be continual along the lines traced by those who, on the one side, have defended the revival of beauty because, as Peter Slater put it, there is something crazy about a culture in which the value of beauty has become controversial, and those who, on the other side, are detractors, and like Albero, for example, charge the renewal of beauty with being deeply anti-modernist and anti-political, driven by intensely nostalgic impulses. Another slide. Admittedly, behind the return of beauty, there is certain awareness that this rejection perpetrates a certain dehumanization, while others sees in it a pathetic effort to promote a humanist aesthetics alien to the understanding of our contemporary condition, which justifiably sent beauty into exile. However, in this return, not every view is politically conservative nor nostalgic and against the course of modern art. Someone like Susan Sontag acknowledges that beauty is a judgment needed to make sense of a large portion of one's energies, affinities, and admirations, which on the one hand should lead us to discard sometimes the use of other terms that might have substituted beauty, but nevertheless sound absurd if we are to say, for example, this sunset is interesting. On the other hand, Sontag marked too the role of beauty in human life, for which it is never mixed with moral values. A slide. Actually, very similar is the departing point of Danto, who, as we see, made a rather singular contribution to the return of beauty. Because Danto was not nostalgic of beautiful art either. Danto's own definition of art, which differentiates it from not art in virtue of its meaning and not depending on its aesthetic appearance, much less its beauty, was part of the so-called anti-aesthetic mainstream that took shape through the art of the 60s and the 70s. Danto, however, admitted that aesthetics and theory of art had excessively identified beauty and aesthetics, obscuring somehow the almost endless diversity of aesthetic modalities that he saw all around him in the art of the pluralistic era that he labeled the end of art, where everything is possible as art, and so everything is possible as aesthetics as well. This means no restrictions on the ways for art to appear. Therefore, Danto found the exclusion of beauty as an artistic value as unacceptable as the former exclusion of contrary values or qualities that had formerly been downgraded in favor of beauty. Then in this account, beauty is not restored to its previous status, but it is only an option. Besides, when Danto marks beauty as an aesthetic quality among many others, is not treating it as a mere synonymous of aesthetic value or an empty complement. Actually, one of the most original and important aspects of Danto's looks at beauty is that he thought about it as a contribution to art criticism. As he put it, the critic tries to explain why things are as they are in a work, and his suggestion was that one picks an aesthetic property, particularly beauty, and ask what it means that the work has that property. Danto considered aesthetic qualities inflectors that rhetorically color the meaning of a work of art by disposing the audience to have certain attitude or feelings toward what the work is about. Thus, artistic beauty, internal to the work, as he put it, is meant to help with interpretation. Like Sontag, I think Danto signaled that sometimes beauty is a meaningful term, especially in contrast to other aesthetic terms that cannot work as an equivalent. In any case, he noted too that beauty is central to a fully human life and to a world worth living in, and so stated that beauty is the only aesthetic quality that has a claim to be a value like truth and goodness. Therefore, when art and good art do not have to be beautiful, humans nevertheless show caliphilia, a natural appetite for beauty. Significantly, the captivation he felt regarding the spontaneous appearance of beautiful shrines, laden with candles, cards, and flowers in Manhattan after the terrorist attack of September 11th, convinced him that beauty would be always too humanly significant an attribute to banish from life. People responded not with anger, but with beauty. No artist could have done better. In this vein, beauty reveals fully appropriate for the artistic elegies. Slide. Elegies, because their natural response is beauty, because they're a way of responding artistically to death and loss as they express grief. According to Danto, in elegies, it is as though beauty works as a catalyst, transforming raw grief into tranquil sadness, helping the tears to flow, and at the same time, one might say, putting the loss into a certain philosophical perspective. Elegies respond to painful experiences, working as consolation, and this was for Danto the paradigm of the place of beauty in the philosophy of art. Some of his favorite examples were Mayalin's Memoria and Motherwell's Elegies for the Spanish Republic. In both cases, beauty helps to heal, and it is therefore coherent with their meanings. Given the contemplative distance that beauty provides, Danto vindicated the option of beauty, even for political art of this sort. However, elegiac art expresses the mood of mourners, not of activists. Another slide, please. And this takes us back to the initial conflict that I seek to explore between beauty and anger, assuming that on the one hand, that is the kind of emotion that motivates denunciation and political activism. And on the other hand, beauty is understood as an experience of passive pleasure, a view that persists in some sectors of art, culture, and education, as we've seen. Indeed, as emphasized from the beginning, in line with the politicization that stigmatized beauty, Danto argued that activist artists should not take the option of beauty because it induces the wrong perspective on whatever they want something to be done about. Namely, the beauty of the representation, when it's not directly dissective, making up the harness of the world, imposes a contemplative, distant perspective that in any case collides with the necessary prolongation of the struggle and the impulse to counteraction. In the case of elegies, beauty is artistically right, but no one is called to a fight. It is time to mourn and reflect because the damage is already done and is somehow inevitable. Instead, he argued that when people need to think that something is to be done, that it is not over yet, anger is demanded as the appropriate emotional response. Again, beauty is at odds with political activism since it cannot provoke emotions which express offense, protest, and revolt, such as anger. However, the complex nature of beauty and anger advises, I think, taking another deeper look at both. Slide. As for the notion of beauty, certainly the incompatibility between the experience of beauty and anger or moral indignation seems in principle well justified. Beauty is currently associated with enjoyable experiences of pleasure. As John Passmore puts it, beauty is always nice, always soothing. I borrow the quote from Kathleen Mary Higgins, who argues that this way of approaching beauty, as always suspicious, so frequent among contemporary artists, intellectuals, and philosophers, actually characterizes beauty as kitsch, namely as an aesthetic form or line. Very far from the ancient conception of beauty as the salient manifestation of truth sustained by Plato and most authors after him, at least until very modern times. In fact, for Higgins, there is a much more genuine conception of beauty than the previous one, narrows and parasites. She refers to a conception that works somehow as a cluster concept involving a set of elements that together recur in most philosophical accounts, namely an orderly structure, unity brought from distinct element, perfection, an occasion for epiphany, radiance, overpowering impact, and incitement of love, ideally divorced from personal agendas. Given the diverse use of the term, probably setting all these elements as conditions of beauty might be too demanding, but I agree with Higgins that unless most of them are present, we are at risk of accepting a very superficial view of beauty and confusing it with other kitsch competitors that she mentions, such as glamour or a mere flawless appearance. Therefore, missing more profound experiences, which recalling again Sontag's words on the beauty of sunsets, turn beauty into a necessary and distinctive judgment. Slide. Now, precisely talking about natural beauties, Emily Brady describes many of them, and other artistic ones, as easy. If we compare them with the more difficult appreciation of things both in nature and art, such as vast mud floods or war poetry, whose beauty involves negative value to some degree. Here, Brady follows Caroline Korsmeyer, who compares beauty with other concepts, such as prettiness, in order to show that the beautiful, in fact, has an enigmatic side, which becomes evident when we appreciate that the conversion of the pretty to beautiful requires a dose of something difficult that arrests attention and causes it to linger. Even sometimes, she says, beauty requires making an appreciation somewhat more strenuous, less seductive to the eye. So considering the hazy borders that beauty has with other aesthetic qualities, such as the nice or the pretty, and other easy beauties, but also with the negative emotion of the sublime, Korsmeyer thinks that it's useful to make some contrasts, and thus she proposes imagining something like a continuum of aesthetically pleasing appearance that will have the pretty and the sublime at its extremes, and beauty will locate more or less in the middle, because it constitutes a kind of appreciation that is more difficult than the charming or agreeable, often carrying a moral or existential weight, absent in those easy beauty, but it lacks the great scale and the power of the sublime. The distinction between easy and difficult beauties that both Brady and Korsmeyer employ comes from Bosanquet. And Korsmeyer points out that the identification Bosanquet operates between a class of beauty which is pleasant to everyone and another class which can present barriers to appreciation, amounting for some person to repellence. But as she asks, what is there about beauty that could repel? Slide. It is true that her account challenges the simple connection usually made between beauty and pleasure or enjoyment, and pushes beauty closer to those aesthetic experiences, such as the sublime, labeled in philosophical aesthetics as the paradox of aversion. In fact, for Korsmeyer, the genuine experience of the beautiful would always involve difficult and deep emotions, and so, according to her, beauty is somehow always paradoxical. The point is, though, that beauty can get truly terrible. Korsmeyer calls terrible beauties those wound up with the arousal of discomforting emotions, such as grief, sorrow, and even disgust. This is one of her examples. Insofar as beauty is at the core always difficult, terrible beauty should not be considered, she thinks, an exceptional or marginal phenomenon, for they would represent beauty in its most profound dimensions. Her argument can then be summarized by saying that beauty elicits reactions that are much too complex to be thought as simply as pleasure. And that the language of the aesthetic pleasure is especially misleading for terrible beauties, since indeed not all beauties are even enjoyed, strictly speaking, she said, though they are appreciated. Korsmeyer understands, however, that if not pleasure, some sort of satisfaction is taken. But her claim is that some aspect of this enjoyment stems from the expansion of understanding that takes place in a kind of apprehension that is aesthetic, not a conclusion of research or an inference, where beauty acts like a lens that produces clarity of vision. Furthermore, in the case of terrible beauty, the negativity of the emotion is neither converted nor compensated, but plays an ineliminable role in the value of the aesthetic engagement. In these cases, attention is arrested by elements that strain the heart and yet they induce us to linger over them and savor them in all their heartache and woe. As she concludes, quoting Marcus Aurelius, in order to affirm, many such beauties will show pleasing to every man, but to him who has a feeling for and deep insight into the things produced in the universe, who has become truly at home with nature and her works. Slide. In the case of terrible beauties, disturbing and harmful insights are aesthetically grasped in profound yet satisfactory forms of difficult appreciation. Thus, I find Korsmeyer and Danto's view very close. Claiming elegies as the paradigm of beauty in art, Danto tells us that beauty puts suffering in a certain philosophical perspective that gives us a kind of meaning to the loss. And both Danto and Korsmeyer are right to assess that beauty does no pain. However, the business of beauty still seems to console. And so when one is called not to stoically stay still and meditate, but to act, beauty seems of no help. Notably for Danto, the contemplative distance imposed by beauty can be completely inappropriate. And for instance, he criticized Salgado's photographs of the Sahel famine because they wrongly embellished suffering humanity by implying that their content is somehow inevitable, like death. Slide. But surely in cases like this, Danto is aware as well that the greatest danger of beauty might rely not so much on the contemplative distance that it seems to impose on any represented content, but on the attraction that beauty inspires for particular content. Because we neither want nor should feel attracted to what we morally resist. This is why, during his intervention in the Palestinian wall in 2005, an old Palestinian man reproached Banksy the beauty of the murals he painted in this brief conversation that the artist reported and is here. You paint the wall, you make it look beautiful. Thanks, he said. We don't want it to be beautiful. We hate this wall. Go home. And indeed, Danto noted beauty is erotic, and it's its rhetorical function to inspire love towards what an artwork represents. For Danto, beauty's relish makes it often morally objectionable. Slide. However, beauty's eroticism does not always turn perversely into allure, as Danto suggests, since it is also present in elegies, his paradigm for right artistic beauty. Danto reported that he felt this attraction when he was struck by the beauty of Motherwell's elegies when the first time he saw them, just to discover how appropriate their beauty was to their meaning. Alexander Nehamas insists on this point. The reaction appropriate when finding something beautiful is love, but loving something is above all to desire to come to know and understand it better than one knows it already. Desire, he says, far from close enough from the world, leads us directly into it. Indeed, not every form of eroticism manifests itself sexually, nor always the attraction exerted distracts from the nature of the object, however painful, as just mentioned, in relation to terrible beauties. On the other hand, characterizing beauty as producing mere pleasurable contemplation can reflect the process of the eroticization of beauty that Nehamas recalled followed the concept of aesthetic disinterest, despite the fact, as he emphasized, beauty is above all the object of love and therefore an experience that mobilizes the emotions and it always looks to the future. Slide. Yet, Even if the pleasure of beauty is compatible with negative emotions, and so beyond contemplation inspires desire, passion, and love, it seems far from being capable of arousing anger. Therefore, it still seems to be at odds with the storm and fury demanded by political activism, for which the stigma that consider beauty as barely useful for politics can still find strong support. A storm, fury, rage, moral indignation, and some other words I'm using here are taken to be, following the analysis of Martha Nussbaum, a species of the generic term anger, which is the term that Dante mostly uses as well. Anger is an emotion that embodies the idea of significant wrongdoing, targeting a person or thing that is of deep concern to the self. The psychologist Paul Sylvia describes anger as a sort of visceral and passionate emotion, but certainly one that involves appraising an event as contrary to one's goals or values and so deliberately offensive. This characteristic appraisal structure is thus likely to produce hostility and antagonistic action tendencies. From a philosophical perspective, Nussbaum's analysis of anger signals two conceptual components. First, the idea of a serious wrong done to someone or something of significance. And second, the idea that something must be done as retribution, which usually takes the form, it would be a good thing if the wrongdoer suffers some bad consequences. Thereby, like Sylvia, Nussbaum asserts that anger always contains a cognitive appraisal of the wrongfulness, even if stored deeply in the psyche and not fully formulated, and about which one can be also wrong, of course. Besides, both Sylvia and Nussbaum characterize anger as a forward-looking emotion. Nussbaum locates anger within the motivation that leads to the taking of retributive action aiming at punishment and revenge. Slide. The wish for payback, although deeply rooted in human nature, often providing psychic satisfaction, is for Nussbaum mostly deceptive. Both in a personal and a social level, she argues, the payback project likely jeopardizes future happiness rather than advancing it. Nussbaum understands that payback is a conceptual part of anger that makes this emotion normatively problematic and politically inefficient. Unbridled anger feeds the Furies, ancient goddesses of revenge that Aeschylus depicted as obsessive, destructive, existing only to inflict pain and ill, making it impossible for love and justice to flourish. Slide. But isn't anger noble and necessary when society is corrupt and brutal? Nussbaum asks. Indeed, do people not have the right, even the duty, to feel anger and revolt when abuse and wrongdoing happen? Why should people just grieve? Dante's view of anger as linked to political action and his parallel distrust towards beauty should be located here. The George Holiday's videotape of the Rodney King beatings by members of the LAPD in 1991, presented in the Whitney Biennale in 1993, represents the kind of work that made him reflect on the exclusion of beauty in angrily political contemporary art. And Nussbaum agrees. Anger, she says, has a valuable role as a signal that wrongdoing has taken place, as a deterrent to others in order to discourage future damage, and also as a source of motivation to address it. So anger has a target, something that grief definitely lacks, proving Dante right in demanding a motivational emotion such as anger as more appropriate for political activism. However, while anger looks forward to the future and is in that sense constructive, the wish for payback enters the scene and banishes anger's nobility. Therefore, to keep anger's noble side, payback must be wiped off. Slide. And Nussbaum then points to a transition route that frees anger from revenge. Detached from revenge, it may not look like anger at all, but according to Nussbaum, even when it is not average anger, just a less common and borderline case, rarely found in its pure form, it is still a species of anger, which naturally takes initially a retributive form in order to reshape retributivism into work and hope. In a nutshell, the entire content of transition anger is how it reaches. Something should be done about this. How shall things be improved? The target of anger moves from payback, this is punishment and revenge, toward more productive forward-looking thoughts, asking what can actually be done to fix and prevent damage, and so it can motivate useful and effective political action. Slide. In order to seek my conclusions, I will recall that not having fully overcome the stigma of beauty, whose emotional effects Danto considered at odds with protest and political activism and the reason of its marginalization in contemporary culture, he showed beauty's significance in human life and presented beauty as an aesthetic quality relevant for artistic meaning that could constitute a legitimate choice today, even for some political works, maybe widening the option beyond what he himself believed possible. But anger and moral indignation are no guarantee of a just cause, and even when this is the case, could motivate and often do stupid and dangerous decisions. This is why political commitments and actions should be open to reflective consideration. For that, Kathleen Higgins offered Danto the contemplation of beauty as capable of providing moral insights, indispensable to reflective and responsible activism, hearing, questioning the utility of anger. I agree, because as Sontag stated in regarding the pain of others, you cannot hit and think at the same time. Also, in this vein, I have argued that beauty can sometimes act as the lens that provides lucidity over the harnesses of the world. Slide. However, I have tried to show that beauty can inspire political protest and action as well. Of course, this beauty won't be the kitschy beauty that Higgins dismissed, nor the prurient appetite Danto warned about, not even the comforting background against which one can think the uncomfortable that Higgins actually suggests. But I defended the terrible beauty that inflicts true pain and causes us to rebel. Because Higgins was right in noticing that the big threat to effective political action is despair, and that political activism requires not only commitment and courage, but also faith. Something that beauty encourages when it makes us feel that something real is lovable. Of course, I do not deny the great impact that images like those that these days come to us from the devastated cities in Ukraine has in order to stir the conscience and activate political decisions. They are unbearable and terrible without any concession to beauty, yet we need to see them and confront them. But even in the heat of the battle, where the political objectives cannot yet be those of reconstruction and the prevention of future damage, which are those that Nussbaum has mainly in mind when she raises the political futility of the vengeful eagerness of anger, but those of fight and hope for victory, beauty can break through, not to lament the damage, but to drive action by putting the latter above the former. I think the orchestra of the Ukrainian Naval Force is giving a concert in the barricades of Odessa or in Kiev here would be examples of that. A slide. Now to my view, other recent images like this, where a Red Cross worker hugs a Senegal migrant rescued in May 2021, or this other one, slide, with again a Spanish soldier hugging an Afghan refugee at Madrid airport in August that same year, provide an experience of terrible beauty in the sense I have defended here, which brings us into an unbearable reality and calls not so much to lament as to active protest, trying to help and protect these people, showing the noble side of anger. I bring together these two similar images to point out the radically different reception that they got. The second, practically unanimously praised, by the first one was heavily attacked in social networks, which shows that, of course, their beauty is not the only factor that determines their possible impact. It will depend on the cultural, social, and political context of their viewing, among many other things. Paraphrasing Sontag again, no effect of a doleful sin can be taken for granted. However, the beauty does not necessarily hamper their moral political effectiveness, I think. Finally, I should say that Korsmeyer also mentions anger, if only to mark that it seems to be easily transformed by beautiful art into a positive encounter. For anger has a noble side that allies, he said, with honor and justice. Following Nussbaum, we can say now that anger's noble side only remains if the furies are brittle and the thirst for revenge is suppressed in order to work for a better future, which is not easy, but not impossible either. As was the case at the end of the Oresteia, when institutions had been created to end a painful cycle of bloody revenge, the furies can be invited to remain in the city, since in fact they are needed. However, to be useful, Nussbaum insists, they will have to renounce their original form. Anger must thus take the transition route, where there is, so I'm trying to defend, a space for beauty to help. Thank you very much. This is all.
Thank you so much, Matilde, for this interesting talk. And thank you, Tomasz, for sharing the screens with us. Can you stop sharing now, just to have a chance to see all of us on one? Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you once again, and I'm welcoming you all, or inviting you all to ask the questions or directly, like raising your hand, and I will ask you to make the question audibly to all of us, or put it to the chat, so I will see it and will make a list of questions. Okay, now I see also the chat, so perfect. If you can, if you have questions, do not hesitate, or make this reaction. There's a hand raise hand button. Yes, of course, also. Okay, maybe can I start? I have
I think
Michelle. Okay.
Sorry, I cannot hear you. Maybe your microphone?
Can you unmute yourself, please?
Sorry, I said that I don't mind to wait if you want to start. It's your prerogative. Anyway, just it's not well solidified, but I'm thinking about what you said about Danto and his abuse of beauty, and let's see if you agree with me. I think that Danto let go of beauty altogether, while because he presented in the abuse of beauty to which you refer, he presented beauty as totally dependent on meaning, and so I myself think that this almost necessarily leads to the claim that that beauty is some sort of external property, if at all, and it doesn't even have to do with the form, composition, appearance, or something of the piece, unless it was meant to be looked like something. So I wonder if you agree with this claim.
Thank you, Michal. Well, I think.
Thank you for a wonderful lecture.
No, thank you. Well, the thing is, the abuse of beauty is actually seen as Danto making somehow a concession to aesthetics to be important for the meaning of the work. The concept that he introduces there, and I mentioned it, but obviously I didn't focus on it when I was, in my talk. is the idea of beauty can be internal to the meaning. So
Yeah.
it's this idea of what is internal and external, which for some critics is not very accurate, because basically artistic beauty is meant to be internal in this sense that he actually defines it as constitutive of the work, meaning as coherent with the meaning and proper to the meaning. So it is, if it's only accidental, maybe it is, as some critics have pointed out, a property of the object and not of the work. As you know, that Dantus makes this difference. So it is, it is one of the things that is not very clear, the way he. But Costello, Dermot Costello has a paper that talks actually about a turn, an aesthetic turn, considering this idea that, what he's doing, Danto is acknowledging that even if after interpretation, aesthetics, the aesthetic of the work, inflects, that he uses the term inflects, trying to keep it like something that is not really the meaning, that just a color. So, but actually, it seems more likely that it should be more coherent to acknowledge that the choice, for example, of beauty, as he says, but this is it is intentional. So it has something to do with the meaning, the pragmatic effects, that belongs to the meaning as well, as that the artist is trying to get from the audience. So I think I'm in the line of these critics, and I think, he's so concerned about beauty and the pragmatic effects of beauty, because is how people receive the works and what they think about what the content of the work. So that makes it part of the meaning, nonetheless.
Okay.
For giving me the chance to make this point more clear.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed your lecture tremendously. So thanks.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Next questions. Okay, maybe I take this moment to ask mine, or maybe it's more a comment than a question in itself. But what I understood, and of course I like the lecture. What I understood, the return somewhere in the middle of this last century from caliphobia to caliphilia, somehow. Because you told us that artists show no shame in showing beauty. That's what was a nice idea. And I also liked this beauty in the middle of continuum between pleasing, something which is pleasing, pretty, and sublime, which reminds me also of Jean-Luc Nancy. He had the same idea. So beauty is in the middle between those notions, and is always in danger to slip into just pleasing. So, but what he told us also was that the beauty can be saved from this slippery, just going through the sublime. So we have kind of access to the beauty, to contemporary beauty through the sublime. And when you compare this, or you triggered this idea that beauty can inspire anger, anger can be compatible with beauty in some sense, and also the anger as a forward-looking emotion can be in some sense saved, or making a salvation through the beauty. So I see kind of compatibilities between these two ideas. So is it true that the beauty needs this access through sublime or anger? Is it something we show that beauty is not just pleasing to the senses, but is something that pleases to the minds? And minds confronted with reality, with paradigm of Ukraine and so on, can be in the state of anger, of course, because we are really angry what's going on by this injustice and so on. So is it kind of access to the different kind of beauty out of the map of senses?
Okay, thanks very much. Two questions here about the first one, from the caliphobia to the caliphilia. Yeah, I mean, obviously when Dante wrote and started thinking about beauty, and that it was the initial, the beginning of this so-called the return of beauty, no? And still very much what you could say the anti-aesthetic and anti-beauty mainstream, but it's still very much in place. And that's why he thought he was still there, which I think he got wrong, considering what happened after. But even if I think that's why I gave those examples, particularly I think it's interesting the one I gave about these curriculums for art education in England, no? Because it is like the stigma still persists. Even if you could say there are a normalization of beauty somehow, and as you know, we are not at the same, we're not living the same kind of caliphobia. Even the caliphobia that sometimes as he reports it is probably too general. If you look at the art of the 20th century, maybe it's not so, there are lots of beautiful works, but it's true that it's not just Dante. I tried to give other sources, no, that there has been this narration, no, and this mainstream, no, that had been, condemning beauty, and that, and still you can see it in some, especially in certain discourses in art and culture mostly. Particularly this, I thought, the idea of the art educators consider beauty and something like old-fashioned, like, and especially passive against any idea of inspiration, for example. That really caught my attention. I think that's still there. So maybe, Dante was wrong. Maybe, in exaggerating somehow the caliphobia of contemporary art, and probably, surely, about what was going to happen afterwards. But the discourse is still there, and I think especially in the political, and when you deal with political activism, and beauty seems still to be like something, well, that it is not the right way to go, and trying to look for more shocking, in the sense of the ugliness, they're showing the ugliness of the world in that way, So that's as for the first question. Is that okay? And as for the second, I didn't know this about Jean-Luc Nancy. I didn't didn't think about it, but so I appreciate the tip. And what I will say here is that to appreciate beauty in the way I've been trying to defend here with Sontag and Danto and Korsmeyer and the rest, is like sometimes what it's useful is to make contrasts with other qualities, because obviously beauty is a term that you use in so many different contexts. That we can't stop that, obviously, but I try to make room, so you will say when the term beauty means something. It's not just empty, and it's different, and it goes to this deeper sense, this cluster concept, as I used Higgins' formulation, that makes it differ from the pretty on one side, from the sublime in the other. That's what I like, this idea of the continuum, because it helps to look at sometimes why we need beauty and no other term. I think that was the point of Sontag. I think this is also the point, can be the point in Dante when he deals, for example, with the elegies. You can say they're pretty. And So Brady, for example, uses this contrast made by Korsmeyer before in her book about the sublime, to say, yeah, they're terrible beauties, but they're not sublime because there is still, the scale, of the sublime is not beauty. So when you make this, then you can find, that beauty can be useful in this way. But also goes the other way around, because I think it's Thomas Lady, I can't recall the paper, but he actually said that it's good to differentiate the beauty from the beauty in order to give some space to the pretty that has been something that has no value in aesthetics. No, actually, so to show that it's different when he wants, obviously, he works in everyday aesthetics, and he wants to, show the importance of these easy beauties as well, and so he makes that, but I cannot recall the paper, sorry, to say that it's not, beauty is something deeper in the sense, when we contrast it with the pretty, and it's worth recalling this even to make, to expand aesthetics beyond what has been traditional. Sorry, I took too long. So is it okay? An answer for you?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. I also thank you for this reminder of Laddie and his paper on agreeableness, basically, but also pretty and so on. So yeah, this is the case. Thank you so much. Next questions. Do not hesitate to ask. Lisa, please.
Hi, Matilde. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. So I have a comment, and I would like to know what you think about it. So it seems to me that, and you said this also at the beginning, so there are two ways in which we use the notion of beauty. So one is when we want to approve an artistic achievement, so as successful, so we say it's beautiful, to say it's well done, it's successful. And then there is somehow a descriptive use of the notion by which we want to refer to the content of the representation, right? So we are referring to the form or whatever, the appearance of the object that is represented. So when we talk about a negative beauty, so like the example of the Caravaggio painting or war image, it seems to me that, the notion of negative beauty can be in some sense, I don't know if it's puzzling or something, because it's like mixing up these two ways in which we use the notion of beauty. In that sense, it's like we are talking about the success of the act of the artist, so the representation, and we are saying, yes, we are approving. We are not talking about the object and the fact that the object is negative or is awful, is repulsive or whatever. So yeah, that was I was thinking. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa. Okay, yeah, I think the answer goes back to the beginning of the intervention, that you said that when what I'm talking here about beauty as an aesthetic quality that is somehow important for criticism, as Danto deals with it. I'm not talking about just saying this excellent artistic excellence. This is a different thing. Well, for Danto, clearly, for many other people as well, beautiful, art doesn't have to be beautiful to be good art. That's one thing. But the idea of having, how you say, an experience that it is not of beauty, but it is somehow discomforting. And which is what the Caravaggio or these other terrible beauties try to show, that doesn't have to affect their aesthetic value, because again, it's not the same. The artistic excellence or aesthetic excellence even is not equivalent to this. This is what it is how to qualify this experience. So it's beauty, but it's a beauty that hurts. And that's, that's something different. Obviously, there are other, I don't know, I mean, many works that are artistically excellent, not even contemporary. I mean, I'm thinking right now, something that is very, it's in relation to this, the Goya disasters, for example, of the war. You cannot call them beautiful. They will not be, you know what I mean, but they're excellent. And they are probably in the ancestors of much of, the activism that we have today. So it's different. That's why I said I'm trying to talk about beauty as, if as something that it doesn't refer to something that you like simply, but it is meaningful.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, the point is analogous to that of negative emotion. So how?
Yeah, exactly. This idea of the paradox of aversion, no, that has been. Why do we like to go? And since the paradox of tragedy in Aristotle has been intriguing the philosophers, Korsmeyer locates a terrible beauty in that kind of frame, Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Laya has a question. Laya, go on. Can you unmute Matilde?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Matilde, because it was a really interesting talk. And I was curious about, well, it's something that came to my mind when I was looking at your last slides. And you slightly mentioned, and is the idea of the politicization or polarization of beauty, and how something I was thinking, for example, about the image of the Red Cross worker hugging the refugee, and how an image that is like candorous and innocent can create so much hatred and so much anger. So I wonder if you could delve a little bit into this idea of how beauty can provoke anger and I don't know, this contrast between the idea of beauty as something universal and this idea of polarized beauty, and where some people see something beautiful, some others see something grotesque or something that's hateful. So.
Well, no, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, okay, yeah, I chose these two images because in Spain, where I come from, well, they were not far, and they were, in time. You say we had, like, I think it was May the first, the Red Cross worker and the migrant from Senegal that came to Ceuta, and the other one was in August after the Afghanistan's situation, no, and all the refugees that have to escape, and especially women. So they're similar. They're very similar. They, in their content, and I think they're terrible beauties, because I think they're beautiful, but that kind of beauty that hurts. That's what I try to show, and that make us feel anger, because it's not like we stay, in contemplative, like it's inevitable somehow. No, I think actually that kind of photographs moves people to, to maybe to donate, or I don't know, but to help. But of course, things are very complex, and I show them just trying not to look naive, in the sense that it doesn't depend on their beauty. It's much more complex. The reception of any image, even the shocking ones, as we know, that sometimes don't have, any effect. And this is why other things, obviously, other factors are there. So what happened with these two images is that obviously there's a big polarization in politics in Spain and in many other countries, I'm afraid, in Europe or in the world. And well, in the first case is we, as you know, we have a problem, migration problem with Morocco and the Africa, you know, so the illegal migration, well, so it's easy for the Furies, the angry Furies, to say that was like kind of propaganda. That was the good. It got abused in the net, in social networks, in Twitter and places like that. You know, amazing. But that's what happens. And while the other one, probably because it was more consensus socially, you know, speaking about bringing women from Afghanistan. Well, the reception was, so that shows you that it's not just depending on the aesthetics, so we'll say, of course not, but I wanted to show that the beauty has an impact. I mean, of course, for many other people, that first image of the Red Cross one in the migrant, the illegal migrant in that jumped the wall in Ceuta and getting into Spain, caused, it was also praised by many people, but it was a focus of, you know, because the issue is a political struggle. And well, this is the story, and I wanted to make this point by bringing them together and see that very similar, but obviously other things taken into consideration make things different. I don't know. I mean, it's you know, they had to go, and you know, this girl, that got really, you know. They was in the press all over, and that it was really, so yeah. It is not just about beauty, obviously, but any other image, not beautiful, could have the same problems. This take us to a more complex debate and difficult, that is how to cause an impact, you know, how artists or journalists or so can, you know, that this is another issue and a very complex one, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the question and the answer. By the way, Elia is also from Spain, so you shared same environment. Are there any other questions? I had just one quick one, and I promise to do not extend too much. I liked also this idea that beauty can act like a lens that produces the clarity of vision. I need to add that hurts, because this vision is something we discover. And still, the similarity of anger and beauty, if this is the case, so can anger make us something like clarity of vision too? Does it work the same way? I know it's like two different type of emotions and so on, but if there are similarities between them, so maybe can be anger something that go through and show us something important?
Yeah, but again, as depend on what kind of beauty we're talking about, depend on what kind of anger we're talking about, and then following Nussbaum, I think this noble side of anger, no, because obviously, as I said, there is a noble side of anger. We have the right and the duty, as I explained, no, to feel it. If not, we will be dead, or something else. Yeah, I don't know, but it is very important not to let anger unchain, because you know, this idea that, according to Nussbaum, is a conceptual part of most cases of anger, which is the idea of retribution, the payback. It is, yeah, I mean, it is natural, it's human, it is, normal, everyone, feels it, but it is not, it doesn't repair anything, it doesn't really, and sometimes makes things worse, and, makes the suffering deeper. And so, yeah, again, this is a very difficult topic, but I think it's actually better even sometimes for the victims to control that hunger and do something. I mean, I had another case very recent in Spain. I'm sorry for being so local, but it came to me. But it's about a film released not long ago. It's about the program for victims of the terror attacks by ETA, which is, you must know, it was a Basque separatist. They were, active not so long ago in Spain. And is this, the government offered the victims to go and visit the terrorists in prison as part of a program of rehabilitation of these terrorists. So some of them refused. They couldn't cope with it, but some of them went. And this is a film about one of them. And it actually helped them as well, to help with the resentment, with the pain. And again, this film, well, awoke the furies again in some part of the political spectrum in Spain, that shows you that it's not an easy thing. But I think it's in the right path. So that kind of anger, well, brittle, can be productive, yes. That's what.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much for all your questions.
I guess there are no other questions. So thanks once again for this wonderful lecture. Thanks for the Q&A section.
Soon in person to many of you.
Yeah.
So
I hope you will come for the conference we are planning to have in November. So that would be interesting. And we would be very happy to have you again as a speaker.
see. Well,
Let's see.
How things go. Hope to see you sometime. Okay.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care. Yeah. Thanks all of you for coming. And the next lecture within the frame of Slovak Aesthetics Forum will be in May. The speaker will be Miloš Ševčík from Charles University in Prague. He's the head of the Department of Aesthetics. More details will be announced soon, so stay tuned. And have a nice evening, all of you. Thank you, Matilde.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you all soon.
Bye-bye.